welcome to the Nonsensical Podcast. This is episode 3. This is the first half of a 2-part recording with a special guest, Jeremy Hall.
Alrighty then, welcome in everybody. Welcome to the Nonsensical Podcast. Today it's 3 hot guys with even hotter opinions. I am your co-host, Sam Wilkerson, and now I'm going to pass it off to your other host, Nate Hassan. Nate, what are we doing today?
Hey guys, so we actually have a special guest on today, our boy Jeremy. Say hi. Hey there, Jeremy.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Jeremy is going to be answering some questions for us, and then we kind of have a gaming topic after that, since we're all into some tabletop games and some board games. But before we get into that, I do want to talk about reviews a little bit. So we do have 2 more anonymous 5-star reviews on Apple. Don't know who you guys are, but we appreciate the reviews. Go ahead and leave those reviews on Apple, and if we see a name pop up, we'll give you guys a shout out in the podcast. And then don't forget to follow us on social media as well. We'll give you a shout out if you give us some nice comments or give us a share there. Sam, I think we are ready to get started in this interview here.
Well, alrighty then. You gonna take that first section?
Yeah, sure, I'll do that. So first off, Jeremy, thanks for coming on. I guess I can explain a little bit how we know you. We kind of already hit it on the first podcast a bit when we talked about how Sam and I got to know each other. But basically, Sam and I both interned in Calgary a little over a year and a half at this point, 2019. So we were interns up there at Multiply Church where Jeremy was at the time. And we kind of got to know him over email and text for a little while. Didn't know him super well. I knew him a little bit before that because I was up there the year before for a short-term trip. When we got there, I stayed with him for a few days before anyone else even got there because I fly standby and standby sucks. So, but no, we love Jeremy. We're glad he could make it on. So thanks for coming on, Jeremy.
Oh, absolutely. Glad to be here.
Alrighty then, Jeremy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How old are you?
Well, no, I am 26 years old, going on 27 in February, but that's okay. No, I grew up pretty close to where Nate is, actually. I grew up in Ohio, just in a small town, a little ways from Columbus. And I am currently living in Cochrane, Alberta, Canada, which is just a little bit outside of Calgary. I am married to my wife, Laurel. It's been about 5.5 years now. It's been awesome. My education, I had my bachelor's in youth ministry, went to Ohio Christian University, was a great time, and now I am just finishing up my Master of Divinity. If you don't know what that is, it's pretty much just the all-encompassing pastoral degree, preaching, teaching, counseling, insert anything you could think Bible-related. Does not include the stuff that pastors also get to do, like fixing the soundboard or cleaning the toilets and that sort of fun stuff. But I will be finishing that up in this coming spring. And if I'm lucky, we will have an in-person graduation service because the world might not be on fire anymore.
That would be the hope.
So, we know a little bit about you, Jeremy, but tell the nice people at home, are you married? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I've been married for about 5.5 years to my wife, Laurel. It was actually the only significant relationship I've ever had. So this is the part where you can all go on, all that fun stuff. But no, ironically enough, as a pastor, I met her in my church's youth group. And we were on an evangelism conference of all things for teens up in Columbus. And, she had kind of always been around me, but she was one whole grade younger than me. And that's basically like the pit of despair. So there's no crossing that at that age. But I was just 16, actually. She was 15 because we met on my birthday. So I get to say that she's the best birthday gift I ever got. Yep, that is 100% true. And we were, so we'd kind of been around each other. I knew of her, didn't really know her. We went to go eat dinner as a youth group at Max and Irma's at Easton Town Center, for those of you who are around Columbus. Don't even think that's there anymore. Easton is. Max and Irma's is not. But was there, and I was sitting looking at the menu because I was not used to sitting at such a fine dining establishment as Max and Irma's. Big step up from McDonald's. And I went, oh, I wonder what I should get. And Laurel, who did not talk much at all at that point. Went, I would try the French onion soup. And it was love at first sight. Actually, not quite, but we hit it off really well. We kind of kept talking and texting a little bit. But about a week later, us two as teenagers, we were working an Upward basketball games concession stand raising money for our youth group. And somebody came up to me and said, hey, I heard that Laurel, she kind of likes you. Maybe you should check in on that. Send her a text. And I went, oh, wow, really? Somebody likes me? Okay. And then I found out about 5 years later that same day, somebody went up to Laurel and went, hey, I heard that Jeremy likes you. Maybe you should text him and find out about that. Somebody set us up. We have absolutely no idea who to this day, but somebody set us up, and now we're married and we're in Canada. So whoever did that, thank you. God aside, this is all your fault. So you're the reason I know what poutine is.
Hey,
don't knock on poutine.
Oh, no,
that's
no,
a good thing to know.
So, yeah, so that next time you try to set up a couple of your friends kind of slyly, just be careful because you could totally change their whole life. So go have fun with that and burden that guilt for the rest of your life. But no, seriously. So we dated for about 5 years. I proposed. We got married a year later, and we've been married 5.5 now. It's been wonderful. No kids yet, but that's okay. We have one awesome dog who is not very thrilled at the moment that I am here recording and not paying attention to her. I went to go get a drink just before we started the podcast today, and I had to walk by her, and she's just laying on the bed, straight up looked at me and just went, and then laid back down. So that would be the Hall household at the moment.
Well, we'll get a little bit more in depth to this later, but just give us a brief overview of what you do for work.
Well, so that's a bit crazy right now. So I do two things. One, I am a full-time student, like I said. I've been working on this for about 3 years now. This is my 4th year of the Master Divinity program, which is a full-time job in and of itself, to be completely honest. But we'll get a bit more into how I got here in a moment, I presume. But I also work kind of as a pastor. So when I came up here, I was working with the church plant. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But I was a youth pastor there, a missions pastor, a children's pastor. I called myself the catch-all pastor. I still believe that was true. And then just before the whole pandemic started, God was kind of calling me out of that into something new. So I had the summer as kind of a time of rest. And now I am working with the sister church to Multiply Church, Junction Church. So I'm working there. I'm going to be preaching some. I'm helping them figure out their online services, trying to make that a bit better. There's talks about starting a ministry in a nursing home when it's safe to go back into those sorts of places. So a lot of good stuff going on. I'll be glad to talk about that more in a few minutes.
Yeah, so let's hit on moving to Canada, actually, Jeremy. So what made you want to move to Canada?
Craziness. No. I just love the cold so much. As you could probably kind of expect with this, it was 100% God. So I didn't even know where Calgary was on a map. I knew it was in Canada somewhere. Alberta's apparently a place. I think that Death Cab for Cutie said Calgary in one of their songs, and that was pretty much the only connection I had. But no, so the real answer to that was I was finishing up my bachelor's of youth ministry in 2015, 2016. I was starting to get ready to head into the last year of it. And it kind of hit me, oh yeah, I should probably figure out what I'm going to do with my life after this degree is over. So Laurel and I had been praying. We've been trying to figure out what was next. And it was kind of weird because a lot of my friends were like, I want to go pastor in this region of the country, or I want to go on for my next degree. And I went, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do next. So, and for context for that, when I was younger, my calling to ministry, I guess, I was in high school. I served in our youth group all the time. I did a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, running sound, video, lyrics, all that sort of fun stuff. And a lot of friends and ministry leaders were kind of speaking into my life and said, hey, Jeremy, I think God is calling you to ministry. And I went, no. I'm not even kidding. Because one, it didn't appeal to me. I was very introverted. I didn't like being in the spotlight or anything like that. But more importantly, for those of you who don't know, ministry can take a pretty big toll on you, emotionally, mentally, physically, especially if you're a youth
Financially.
pastor. Yep, financially. If you are going into pastoral work for the money, don't. But no, if you're going into it to see lives change for Jesus, by all means, run to it.
For sure.
But for me, that is not something I'm interested in at all. So I went to the other thing I was interested in, which was media. And I figured, I can kind of cheese my way by with this because I'm already serving with media in my local church. So I can hop in this, get a job at ESPN or something like that, and then still serve on the side, that sort of deal. And so I went to Asbury University in Kentucky for my first couple years of school, and I was going for video production. And to be honest, I loved it. Like, if you know anything about old school Christian music, like the guitarist for Audio Adrenaline back in the day, Barry Blair, he was my sound professor. It's really weird mixing
cool.
music when he's looking over your shoulder, but it's a Christian school, so you go into the faculty chapel day, and all of a sudden they start rocking Big House. So if you know nothing about Christian music, you're probably quite confused right now. And if you go and listen to that song, you will be just as confused. But OG church kids know where it's at. But no, so I was doing that. It was pretty awesome. Like they had like the guy who did like the production on like the movie Casino were coming in and giving lectures and things like that. And I was loving it, but it still didn't quite feel right. And so one day I went to our local church service. There's kind of a mega church in Lexington, had a big tech team and all of that, which was why I was there. And it was a Sunday that I wasn't scheduled to run video. So I was there. I was just kind of sitting in the crowd and had nothing to do with the sermon at all. No disrespect to the pastor. But God just really got a hold of me during that service. And, there's Jeremy, you know what I'm calling you to. Stop running to it. I am calling you to serve the church. Quite a few months of prayer and reflection and talking to people I trusted followed that. And at the end of the day, I ended up agreeing with God, which is typically the right response. So good job, young Jeremy. So anyway, that's the background for this. I'm sitting at the end of switching my degree to youth ministry. It was basically the same as Christian ministries, except for it had a couple more Plato classes, as I like to call them. So instead of how to organize a Bible study, which I did learn, by the way, there was more how to organize a lock-in. And, this is how you call a laser tag place to set up an appointment. But so nothing wrong with that. So I'm finishing up this degree and I'm going, okay, what is next? I know I was obedient to God. I'm finishing up this degree. I have this calling to serve the church, and I have no idea what that's supposed to look like. And through the process of it, I got connected with a church planner in my hometown. His name was Chris Flora, and I was interning under him for a couple years. He was the youth pastor at one of my home churches. And so that's kind of how I got connected to him. And it had gone really well. I was learning to preach. I was doing ministry. We saw the youth group grow. That was all God. Really cool stuff. And I realize now that that was the reason that I was in the youth ministry program instead of a Christian ministry program, because I had to do an internship. I was with Chris. And along the way, towards the end of 2015, Chris got this crazy calling to move to Canada and plant a church. For him, he had been working with a few different youth organizations. They had like a national meeting every year. This was back in a time where you could actually see people face to face. I know that's really weird now, but and he was talking to a gentleman for the Southern Baptist Convention's church planning arm, NAM. And the guy worked in Canada, and he worked in Edmonton. It's a city about 3 hours to the north of here. Pretty much has a big water park, and that's about it.
Yes.
So he's talking to Chris about Edmonton, church planning going on there. And he's just kind of like, oh, that's really cool. I'm glad that's going well for you. And then the guy kind of says, yeah. And then we have another city to the south where we're starting some stuff up called Calgary. And for Chris, it was like alarm bells and whistles going off. So long story short, he explores this. He talks to his wife about it and realizes God is calling us out of youth ministry and in to start a church plant. So a couple months later, I had finished up our Wednesday night youth stuff. We had a hospital visit, so I went with Chris. And on the way to and from the hospital, he's talking to me about, hey, I think God is calling us out of youth ministry. He's calling us to Canada, of all places. Here's all the way God's been confirming that over the last few months. I wanted to let you know before anyone else, since we're particularly close, so it wasn't a shock to you. And my response should have been, I'm really sad, but I'm glad God's calling you and you're being obedient to him. My actual response was after he got out of the car, I was talking to my wife, and I say it was like gasoline being poured on a fire. Something just flared up inside both Laurel and I. And if anybody's watching this for some reason that is trying to figure out what God is calling them to, it doesn't always happen where you and your significant other get this calling at the same time. You should be on the same page by the time you do it, but sometimes God has to work a little bit longer on one person than the other, and that's okay. That wasn't the case for me, because we just kind of looked at each other and was like, I think God is calling us to Canada. And to be clear, it wasn't because we were particularly attached to Chris and Mindy. We loved them. We were really sad to see them leave, but you can have the closest relationship with somebody in the world and not go, man, I love you so much that I want to dump my whole life, move to Canada, and figure out what an Arctic winter looks like. You know what I mean? But this was something that God was starting. And so we spent the next few months ourselves kind of exploring, trying to figure out, is this true? No rash decisions. And other people started speaking this into our lives as well. I actually never told my mom that we were looking to go to Canada. My mom told me, which was really weird. So I was working at Walmart at the time as an unloader. So basically trucks come in, I unload it. You try to break as little as possible and have a good day. By the way, not a good job if you have asthma like I do, but it paid the bills. But anyway, I was still living close to my mom at the time. I actually was living there because it was a few months. Well, no, I wasn't living there. It was right after we got married, but my apartment was only like 30 minutes away. And my Walmart I worked at was 2 minutes away from our house. So I kind of went, hey, can we meet up at Cane's, grab some chicken during lunch one day? I'd like to talk to you about some things. So I sit down, we're talking, we're catching up a little bit. And she kind of looks at me. She's like, so what is all this about? God's calling you into missions, isn't he? Where to? Is it? No, it's not Africa. Canada. Is God calling you to Canada? That was how the conversation went. That was the whole conversation.
Wow.
And I went, well, actually.
Yes, you're right.
Yes. So that was a big confirmation for me because I never told my mom we were moving. She told me.
Huh. That's pretty cool.
So that was one of the first big ways that God kind of went, yeah, I'm in this. So from there, we started announcing to people, we started raising money, and through partnerships, through talking at churches, skip through the boring details of the next year and a half. It is not easy to raise funds to move to another country. But in July of 2017, Laurel and I moved to Canada officially. And as one more aside, before we move forward from there, if you are going to make the drive from Ohio to Canada, don't do it twice. Chris moved at a different time. He moved in January of 2017. And my bright self went, yeah, I'll go and drive with you and help you move because I don't have classes this week. We're on a break.
Oh, no.
It was a blast, but it was also 34 hours.
Oh, my gosh.
And that was an adventure. We had a little caravan. Things were mostly good. We actually hooked up all these like CB radios that we were talking back and forth with these walkie-talkies, but we were all on the same channel. It was great. Occasionally we would find a child that happened to be on the same frequency and harass them a little bit.
I didn't know where you were going with that.
Yeah,
eventually we'd find a child.
Every now and then we find a child.
No. There was someone in the caravan who would be unnamed and was not me. Had the CB radio, and we were like talking back and forth because we're driving down the highway. It was easier than using the cell phone minutes. And we hear like these kids playing hide and seek in their house. And I was like, oh, this is awkward. We should switch channels. That was my
Oh,
response.
no.
Somebody else grabbed the CB radio and went, hey, kids, I'm going to come find you. It's like, oh, my goodness. Give me that. We're going to get arrested.
Just keep on driving.
Like, so if there was ever a manhunt for a creepy child person in South Dakota, I may or may not know what happened there. But no, so I did that, got to Calgary, flew back, and then I made the drive a second time 5 months later.
Oh,
So I have spent 68 hours of my life driving from Ohio to Calgary. So,
how long was the entire process? Like not driving, but like the process from like the moment you knew you were going to Canada until you were living in Canada. How long was that? You said a year and a half?
About that, yeah. It was from November 2015 to July 2017. So about a year and a half.
Okay. Yeah, so close.
Yep. And so we were trying to figure out what to do when we were moving up there, because I was like, okay, we're going to go up here. At that point, there was no thought of being on staff at a church. It was just purely going up to help. So it's like, okay, I'm going to have to find a job up there. There's Walmarts. I could probably figure that sort of thing out. But then the other thing I was trying to figure out was schooling, because I did feel like God was calling me to go on for my master's degree, which, as I mentioned earlier, I am doing. And that was another thing that God kind of worked out, because I was looking at a few schools. I knew I wanted a Master of Divinity. But I was like, okay, how am I going to do this? We're trying to figure out the process to get a visa to get into the country. Everybody else that moved up went on a clergy visa. So, you move up, you're doing a religious service, they let you in, but you can only make money from the church that you're working at, as far as the government is concerned. For me, I was trying to figure out how that was going to work. I went, okay, if I raise money, the church would give me that as the paycheck, that sort of deal. But then NAM kind of talked to me, that church planning board, and went, hey, we actually have a seminary 30 minutes from Calgary. And I went, and it's the most wonderful place that I could have picked to go to for school. It's right out there. The professors are awesome. They know what they're doing, but it's a small school, but they care. So they're not just invested at the place I'm going at seeing you get a degree, pass the class, all that sort of stuff, but they actually care about your life and your ministry. So when there are changes happening, when you're trying to figure out what's going on next for your ministry, their office doors are open all the time. So that's just been another blessing from God to be able to be at the seminary working at such a good place. So, yeah, 2017 rolls around and we take the U-Haul and head up to Canada.
Awesome. Well, one more question before I hand it over to Sam. What do you think was the hardest part about moving up to Canada? Not after you were there, not like the job you're doing once you're there, but like the hardest part in the moving process itself.
The two things, one would be leaving family. I'm not going to lie, that was hard. Both all of my immediate family and all of Laurel's immediate family lived within a 30-minute radius of where we were in Ohio. And like before God kind of called us to move, like we were looking, her mom and her grandma live on the same street in her hometown. And there was a house for sale in between both of them. And we actually had been considering getting it. It was a little bit of a fixer-upper, but it wasn't bad. It was a 4-bedroom house for $68,000.
Oh wow!
So
that's cheap.
Yeah, a bit of work to do on it, but definitely, yeah. So we've been talking about, maybe we get this, we stay here, we're close to family. My mom is actually my grandmother biologically, so we've kind of been looking at it as, okay, she's not on her deathbed or anything. She's doing great. Yeah. Still works, runs on the treadmill every day, but it's going, okay, I probably have about 20 less years with her than I would otherwise if she was my biological mom. And so staying close to family was pretty important at that time. And then so leaving that, we trusted God. They were 100% on board with it too, but it was hard. The other part was the financial part, because you trust God to provide, but there's a lot of financial hurdles involved in moving to another country. And so talking to churches, talking to other people, a lot of them, people you've grown up around, going, hey, this is what God's calling me to. here's my plan, here's what's going on. Will you support me in this if God's drawing you towards it? That's not easy. And it's definitely, there's a book I have called The God Ask. I can't remember who it's by, but it's talking about how, you're not asking people for this sort of a thing. You're asking God for it. And the people that he moves to support you will be the ones that do. And that was a really hard lesson to learn. But God provided all the way around. I think I'll give you this as another quick God provided story. One of the things that I wasn't expecting that we ran into was a bit of a hurdle with the study visa specifically. So for the clergy visa, you just you apply for it. They validate, oh, this is a real church you're coming to. You're serving a ministry purpose. Generally, they give you the visa. Now, obviously, you're talking about getting an international visa, so it's not quite that easy. But for the sake of discussion, that's kind of what you're looking at. The study visa is kind of the same thing. You apply to a school, you get accepted, you send that information to the government, and they go, okay, you're a legitimate student going to a legitimate school. The problem is there's one extra hurdle, and that's called proof of funds. So they want to see that you have enough money to basically be able to pay tuition and, live there without, mooching off the Canadian system, which I totally get. But what they wanted was they wanted to see that you had enough money up front to pay your first year's tuition and to be able to support yourself for the first year. And the number that came out to was about $20,000. Now,
a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. And as a student fresh out of college who was working a job to Walmart and spent all of those savings on trying to move to Canada, that was not something I had in the bank. And they're all like, well, if you have any property, you can show the deeds. If you have any scholarship, you can send in that as proof, your bank accounts, all of that. And I'm going, okay, we do not have this. I trust God's calling us here, but we don't have 20 grand. Yeah. And on one hand, I say we trusted God, and if he's calling us to this, this is what we're going to do. On the other hand, I was still scrambling and trying to figure out, okay, how can I patchwork this thing together myself? The day, I kid you not, this is not always how God works, but the day that I had to send in the documents for the proof of funds, I got a letter in the mail for a scholarship that I had applied for that I had completely forgotten about. It was a local scholarship for students in the county I grew up in that were either going into ministry or medical work. And I knew the pastor who had gotten at that time the biggest 1-year disbursement from it, and it was $8,000 for him. I get a check in the mail for $20,000 on the day I have to send it in. And so I send in that letter alone with all my other documentation, and they go, yeah, you're good to come. And I kid you not, when that $20,000 converted to Canadian currency, it paid for my whole degree.
That's awesome.
I will have no debt from my master's. I have a lot of debt from my undergrad, but I will have no debt from my master's. So that was getting to Canada.
So you've told us a little bit about what you do for work, Jeremy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your job specifically this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I'm in a little bit of a different phase where I am technically working as an intern with Junction Church right now. That's basically, I'm still sort of a pastor. I'm just not officially getting paid for it. That's okay. Our support is still coming from other people, family, friends, people who believe in us around the U.S. and Canada, just like it was before. But what I'm working with right now is we have a few different projects with the church we're working through. So one of those is the church is in an interesting place, like many churches, as to where they moved online at the moment. So we're trying to figure out how to minister and best reach the people in our congregation, in our area, while still meeting online. There's talks going on about finding a good location, but with the pandemic, church places around here are a little bit more reluctant to rent to churches. So I have been working on finding and building an online platform for the church. Right now, we're doing it through Facebook Live, which is working very well. But one of the things I found is that Life Church in the States put out a free resource called Church Online Platform. And it's you can upload the videos or do it live. to have the sermon. There's a chat going on at the same time. The Bible's built into it. You can put in notes, connection cards, tithing links. So I've been working on that on the back end of building it up so that we'll have a bit more of an efficient platform to do our Sunday services while we still have to be distant and socially distant. We're doing a survey right now, too, with our people to kind of figure out where they are in the whole regathering thing. And so far, it seems like a lot of them are just kind of like, we're not ready quite yet. So how do you do ministry when you can't be face-to-face? There's not a precedent in Acts for this. So that's something I've been praying through and trying to build for our church. I'm also going to be preaching a good bit. I'm going to be preaching 3 or 4 times over the next few months and have a chance to speak into the life of our church that way. One thing that's really interesting, as soon as we get the go-ahead to move back in, is we have an opportunity to start a ministry in a nursing home, Westman Village up here. Pastor Jim, the pastor of the church I'm at now, had been in talks with this nursing home in our community before the pandemic started. They did like 1 or 2 kind of test services, and it was really well received. But there's this whole community in a nursing home who has nobody reaching out to them, and they want it. They want the connection. They want the Sunday services. They want people who care about them speaking Christ. So we're pretty close to getting the go-ahead on at least a limited basis to start moving in and doing some stuff again. Now, wearing the mask, making sure everything's sanitized and all that. But I am going to work directly with Jim over the next few months to try to set up that ministry as well. And then from there, there's a bunch of other things that I'm doing. So once again, the pastor's kind of the catch-all. But been working on the back end to do some Zoom small groups and figure out, how we can be praying for and meeting the needs of people in our congregation. And, there have been some people, ministry leaders who have been going, hey, the church isn't always going to be able to meet in person in big buildings like we are right now. So we got to get ready and figure out how to do ministry remotely. And to be fair, most of them are going, not literally, but it's kind of the world's going to collapse and we have to figure out other ways to do ministry. Turns out they were right. It just wasn't in the way they were expecting. Communism didn't take over the world and all that, but for the rest of us who didn't have the capability to start going online and all of that unnecessarily, we're trying to figure out how to do ministry in a totally different way. The way that I was doing ministry in February at the moment doesn't work anymore, at least not in its fullest way. The principles are still the same. I am a firm believer, and I believe Scripture speaks to this, that the gospel transcends culture and it transcends ways of sharing that message. So it might look different, but that root is the same. What that means is you can take the gospel, you can take the message of Christ, and you can put it in a different form depending on what culture you're in, what different situation you're in, and it's still going to ring true. You're not distorting it by putting it in a different format, which brings us to now where we're looking at church online. Is this the preferred way to have church? No, it's not preferred. Gathering in person would be best. But is it still the gospel? Is it still church? Is there still a way for God's people to come together and accomplish the gospel mission? Absolutely. So this kind of trying to sort through that and go, how can we take the situation we're in and leverage it the best, not just to kind of survive the pandemic and survive until things are back to normal, but how can we take this and leverage it for the kingdom of Christ? So that's kind of been my big focus at the moment.
So when did you start at Junction?
So I started at Junction about 2 months ago. My time at Multiply kind of wrapped up literally 4 days before the pandemic started. Long story, but the basic of it is just I was coming into my last year of school, and I felt like God was drawing me into something new. It was time to focus a bit more on schoolwork, get things finished up there, and then step into whatever he was calling me to next. And then I stepped away from Multiply and the world ended. So, woo!
Oh, wow.
Honestly, like I'm never going to be the person who's like, thank God for the pandemic. It was so great. Like, no, like hundreds of thousands of people are dying and, that's not a good thing. But God did kind of give that as a blessing for me because he gave it to me as a break. For the first time in 3 or 4 years, I had a summer where I had no school going on because it was, summer, and I
Yeah.
had no church going on because I had stepped away. And so there wasn't a plan out next week's service. There wasn't get there and set up and tear down a church service. There was no small groups. How do I put this? It was both sad because there was a sense of community and connection that was missing, but it
Yeah.
was also really refreshing. Not saying that, if you're having a bad time, you need to run away from the church and just, live in the woods for 3 months. No, but it was a chance for God to just kind of refresh us and give us some strength back before the next thing.
I know that y'all stayed busy at
We
least while we were.
Yeah. Sam and I did that. We definitely understand tired.
Yes.
And you did it for like 3 years in a row, so props to you.
Yeah. Totally worth it. Very difficult. So anyway, it's coming up to the end of summer, and I was wanting to get back into ministry anyway, but there was also a requirement for my seminary degree that I had to be involved with a church as like an intern or in some role for 8 months for 2 semesters. You have to have a big project or a couple big projects. Westman Village and building up the online platform would count as that for me. But you couldn't do it retroactively. So when I was at Multiply, I built a children's ministry. We built up summer outreaches that went from 2 camps to 22 camps in a couple years. We built a youth ministry from 0 to 10. Great things happened. And I don't take credit myself for that. That was all God, but that was stuff I was able to accomplish. And they're all like, that's great, but that doesn't count for this. So it's like, okay, how do I find a new ministry in the middle of a pandemic? And so it was funny, actually. This was God working again. I had known Pastor Jim pretty well at Junction Church from working with Multiply. Like I said, he was the sister church. We have a church planning kind of network in Calgary. So there's 3 churches. There's Southwinds Church, which was the first one. Then they planted Junction, and then Southwinds and Junction came together to plant Multiply. So that's kind of the church planning family tree. So for Junction Church, Jim sent me a Facebook message first and was like, hey, I heard you were moving on from Multiply. I wish you the best. If you ever need an internship or a chance to serve somewhere in the future, give me a call. We would love to have you. That's like awesome. I genuinely consider that, but I was like, I'm not at a place right now to decide. And then about 5 days later, we had just moved back to Cochrane from Calgary, which is about an hour away, but it's right next to the seminary I'm at. And I'm in Walmart, and I hear, hey, Jeremy, and I turn around, and Jim is there, which is really funny because, once again, it's an hour away from the church. Yeah. And so we're talking in the checkout line for a few minutes, and he's just kind of like, hey, once again, you need a place to serve, let me know. I put that in the back burner for a few months, and then God just really brought that to the forefront of my mind of everything. So I sent a message to Jim. We met up, and there was another lady. If you remember Denise, she was serving at Junction Church at that time, in kind of the same way, helping with the youth, helping plan out some of these things. And she had just finished her time up here and moved back to the States. And so they had a really big need all of a sudden for somebody else to step in and help out in a similar way. So that's how I got connected with Junction. God was able to give me a time of rest and then move me into this new church situation where it was both helping me with my degree, but also filling a need that they had because they lost one of their core volunteers.
Well, that's good. So you came into this new position at Junction in the middle of the pandemic, not quite the heat of it, but close enough to the heat of it. So tell us a little bit about what it's like coming into clearly you knew some people there, but coming into a new church in the middle of it, not being able to meet anybody in person. Tell us a little bit about what you did to overcome, how kind of get to know the people.
Yeah, and overcome has definitely been the right word. I would not recommend this as the optimal way to start a new church position to anyone. So normally what happened, you'd go, you get introduced on a Sunday, you would hang around, you'd talk to people after the service, make some house calls. be there for small groups. Problem is, none of those things are happening, and people really don't like it when you show up at their house right now. So, like, hey, I brought cookies and COVID. Like, it's not a good time. So kind of had to try to find new ways to work through that. So, for example, Sunday services, we're on Facebook right now. Chatting in the comments was one way to do that. So, kind of, say good morning and reply to people, but also, something comes up in the service. Jim is sitting in the comments too, since he's not preaching live, but you can kind of go, hey, this hit me this way. What do you think about that? And people start replying, and you can get to know people by talking that way. I did introduce myself via video in one of the sermons, but another way that helped is we did a 3-week small group course over Zoom over the spiritual gifts. So kind of what are the different ways that different churches and denominations view them? What do they look like in practice? How do we use them? And then kind of one of those small gifts inventories to be like, how might God have gifted you? But we did that live via Zoom. So I logged in 15 minutes before we started, and as people started popping in the chat, I'd introduce myself and start talking to them. So that was a way to get to know some people in a way that you might not be able to otherwise. Past that, I'm still trying to figure out how to even more effectively meet people in our church. I figure I've, on some level, met about half the congregation by now, but there's still a lot more to go. And, there's always going to be those people who they turn on Facebook, they watch it in their jammies, and they don't really communicate or, anything like that. So trying to figure out how to best reach out to people and both as a minister get to know them, but also as a pastor figure out how to support them. That's been something that's been interesting. That's something that Jim's been trying to figure out as well. He obviously knows the people, but trying to support them, that's a whole nother challenge in itself. And I don't know that I have all the answers to that right now, but I think that God's revealing new ways and new opportunities day by day. And I've seen it start moving in the right direction. And over the next few weeks, I expect it to keep moving that way.
Hey, have them listen to this podcast. They'll get to hear your story a little more.
Right. Yeah.
There's been stuff I've never heard.
Yeah. Like
this podcast.
Yeah. You guys go, what happens? Like we had a whole church join our podcast in a day. Well, shout out to Junction Church.
All right, so I've got one last question before I hand it back to Nate, and that's just tell us what motivates you most in your job. What gets you going in the morning?
Honestly, it's being able to serve God and being able to accomplish the gospel mission, because I'm going to assume that most of the people listening to the podcast are not ministers. It's not a straight up ministry podcast. It's not like everybody's coming in going, okay, what are your sermon prep tips? These just normal people. Maybe you want to talk about football. Maybe you want to talk about games. It's whatever's going on, and that's okay. And for all of you, ministry is hard. Like it is genuinely hard. And there is a big emotional toll that comes along with it, because people who are called to ministry, they generally aren't paid the best. They're stepping into situations where they're walking alongside people in their best times and their worst times. When the marriage starts falling apart, generally you're the person who gets to step in and speak Christ into the situation. When the miscarriages happen, when the world's falling apart, when you're trying to sort through your mental health and you're wondering if God even cares because you're not feeling the joy of the Spirit that's supposed to be there. And even, like, honestly, here's something you might not know. People in the church are still human. And I say this in full love and not indicting on anyone, but people can be crappy, and people in the church can be crappy too. And all of that piles up. And it all takes a toll on you. And it's only through God that it can sustain. So when you ask what gets you up and keeps you going at it in the morning, it's not just oh man, it's 8 a.m. and it's still dark and I don't want to get out of bed. That could be part of it too. But but there's a lot of other things that's weighing into it. And so it's Christ sustaining, but it's also knowing that you're accomplishing something bigger than yourself. And when I say that, it's with the assumption that it's not Jeremy's awesome and he's doing all of this. It's I'm being faithful to God, and through my willingness to be available, he's doing these things, and I'm honored to get to be a part of it. But when I see lives being changed, when I see people growing closer to Christ, when I see families being restored, or when they're not restored, I see healing come in other ways. Those are the things that keep me going. When I see life coming through, because anytime that Christ, that the Holy Spirit, that God is truly present in something, you see life coming. Something the Bible says is that the word will never come back void. You speak out the words of life, and something's always going to come back out of it. Something's going to grow. You're not going to go and preach the truth of God and nothing happens at all. It's always going to return something. So, and for people here, I know that there's people listening to this that if you're not a Christian and you stuck around this long to hear my story about moving to Canada, one, props to you, and also you probably think I'm a little bit crazy right now, and I get that, I totally do. But being able to see just life, being able to see good things growing out of people's lives because of the work that I feel like I've been called to do here, that makes it 100% worth it. Even on the days that I wake up and I'm like, why am I here? Because I have those days. I guarantee you every minister has those days. They have those moments.
Yeah.
But life, the gospel, that's what keeps me going through it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's cool to hear your motivation behind it. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the average like turnover for a youth pastor, like the average lifetime of a youth pastor is like 3 to 4 years. So the
It
fact that
is.
you've already been doing it for what, like 3, 4, 5, maybe at this point.
Yeah.
You still are motivated to do it just because the spirit's moving inside you. That's awesome to hear.
No, that's absolutely correct.
Kind of moving away from work though, let's talk about Canada. So, what are the biggest differences between back here in the States and Canada?
Well, one is called Canada, one's called the United States. Sorry. No, so it's really weird when you come here because you know how you tend to get a culture shock when you move to a different country or you go someplace you're unfamiliar with. It's like that here, but it's not always as overt as you would expect. So, unless you go to, say, Quebec, things can feel somewhat similar. This is still a North American culture. For the most part, you're still speaking English. Excuse me. You have French as the dual language. So all the packaging is in English and French. You do have people speaking French, but you get here and it's not like you showed up in Britain and everything is different. A lot of it is what lies under the surface. It's the way people view, politics. It's the way that they view their relationships with each other, how they go out, what their travel patterns are, the way they think. It's all the stuff that lies under the surface. Because when you're driving down the road and you look over and you see Walmart, McDonald's, and Wendy's, you're kind of going, okay, this feels a bit like home. But then when you're talking to someone and like a lot of their news is centered around what's going on in the States, they're trying to figure out, politically what's going on. A lot of that's tied to here. When people go, oh, yes, I am fiscally conservative, but socially liberal, that's something you don't see in the States. You're all or the other typically on those sorts of things. The way that people connect with each other here, believe it or not, it's cold in Canada. And I live in the southern part of Canada. So what you'll have is that a majority of people in Canada, they don't know their neighbors, at least not very much, except for the ones like maybe on the left and right. And I'm even guilty of that too. Now, granted, I did move here during a pandemic, so I guess I have a little bit of a reason, but I don't know who lives on either side of me. I know nobody in my community, and that's pretty normal for Canada because they come in, they drive their car into the garage, they shut the door, and then they live in their own little castle. And they typically, unless they're going for work or the mountains, they just kind of live and do everything within 15 minutes of their house. So it's a lot of that under the surface stuff. And I do have to remember that I am, at the core of it, I'm an American living in Canada. So as I say all of this, I go, these are the differences I've seen. And there's a lot more that, you could fill a whole podcast with just this. And then a Canadian could look at me and go, what are you talking about? Because I am always, not always, I could live here for 30 years and get a good idea. But at the core of it, I'm still an outsider looking into it, comparing it to my own culture. And you're always going to have a cultural bias wherever you came from. So if I am sitting in central Ohio, yeah, I have a pretty good idea of what's going on because that's where I grew up, that's where I'm from. But sitting in Canada, I'm always going to bring an American bias to it. And they might look at it and go, oh, we don't even view it from that perspective. So that's something important to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah. So what about like social norms? So like the biggest one for me when I was up there was that, and you told us this, but like Canadians won't say no. They'll give you like they'll say yes, like oh
Yep.
yeah, I might be there. Oh yeah, that sounds fun, and then they just never show up. So like
Yeah.
that's an example of a social norm. But like, are there any other ones that are kind of obvious to you?
No, that is a big one because they just kind of this cultural politeness. That's a huge one for Canada, and you see it riffed on in the States
Yeah.
all the
No,
time.
no, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I
No,
think
no, no.
Americans are very quick to say no. I'm not doing that. Like no, that sounds dumb. I
Yeah,
think it's better to be polite. Don't get me wrong.
yep,
But
yep, yep.
that's
But
just a
they
different
they
factor.
don't want to offend you, and typically for the typical Canadian, and I mean, once again, you're talking very broadly here, so not
Yeah,
everybody
yeah,
lines up with this, but people generally don't want to offend you, and it's very a pluralistic. You do what's good for you, I'll do what's good for me, and that kind of lines up with this too. So they don't want to just flat out go, no, I'm not coming to that because they don't want to offend you.
sure.
So, for example, it's not uncommon to say, hey, we're having a dinner at our house. Do you want to come over and be there? And they'll go, oh, sure, absolutely. Or, talking about your church and, you're talking to someone on the street and they go, oh, yeah, I'll be there. I'll come one of the next couple Sundays. And they never show up.
So
They
what? Go ahead. Sorry.
when they do that, they're trying to save you face in a way. They don't want to disrespect you by saying, no, I'm not going to be there. So it's better to say, oh yeah, I would come and then not show up because they weren't disrespecting you, at least from that perspective.
Sure, sure.
What were you going to say?
No, I was going to ask the next thing. So if I'm talking about the normal Ohioan, so if I'm looking at someone in Central Ohio, I'd probably say it's a guy maybe like 6 footish, probably white, probably speaks
Yep.
English pretty well educated, maybe a mix of like that Appalachian accent with the Midwestern like Minnesota and like the long O's.
Yep.
What does that look like for a Calgarian? Like, are there certain physical traits or certain like mannerisms that they have?
Yep, absolutely. So for a Calgarian, you have definitely not just white. So Canada as a whole is more of a mosaic. You talk about the states and how, oh, America is a melting pot. Everybody comes in, we blend all of our cultures together, and that's American. Canada is not like that. So much so that the government says that in their official guides. Like when you're studying for your citizenship chest, that did not come out right. Citizenship test. Or, you're getting your welcome to Canada guide. Literally the first page, because I've looked, you flip it open and it says, Canada is not a melting pot. Canada is a mosaic. And the difference between a melting pot and a mosaic is that in a mosaic, you can still see all the individual pieces.
Yeah.
They all come together to form a bigger image, but if you zoom in really close, you still see each of the little pieces. Like you've all seen, each of the gems, like you get the rocks and you put it together, different colors. And if you're really close in, it's like, that's red, that's blue. And then you zoom out, and it's like, oh, that's Nicolas Cage's face. Like, it's the same thing. Not that Canada is Nicolas Cage, but it is true in the sense that everybody, when they come to Canada, they become Canadian plus something else. And that's very true for Calgary. They retain the culture of where they came from, but they become Canadian as well. That's also extremely true for Calgary because Calgary is a city that has a lot of immigration in it, or at least it did before the world went to crap. So you have, it's a huge oil center here in Alberta. It's kind of the banking center. It's the Silicon Valley for Canada. And so you have people coming from all over the world and typically skilled workers. So you have a lot of affluent college degrees, probably master's degrees in the city. They are not all white by any means, but they are typically on the younger side. So you're looking at a lot of people who are in their 30s to 40s, young kids. New schools are having to be put up every year or so just because they're running out of room for the kids. You have your older people as well. it seems that they kind of all stick to their own communities. So Calgary is growing so expansively that new communities are popping up at the edge of the city every day.
Yeah.
You guys have been gone for a year, Sam and Nate. If you came back right now, you wouldn't recognize the area you were in. There are 3 new communities past Silverado that are there now.
Jeez.
Oh
And
wow.
they have completely redone the whole highway interchange to accommodate the growth.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. For reference for the listeners, when we were in Calgary, you basically go down the main freeway, which is it Deerfoot? Is that correct, Jeremy?
Yes, that's it.
So you're going south on Deerfoot. You go through Shaughnessy, where the church was on the right, and then right after that Silverado. And they were building Silverado up when we were there. But right after Silverado, it's literally just big open field, nothingness. Imagine like kind of like a cornfield or a soybean field you see here in Ohio, but mainly grass or mustard seed or whatever. But from what you're saying, it's literally just communities now. Like
It's houses now, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Golly.
So, and that's the thing. Like, it's growing quickly. You have people from all over the world. Most of them are going to be your native Canadians, different Asian cultures, or Filipino. You don't see a lot of Hispanic people or Spanish-speaking people at all. They are here, but not nearly so much. It's funny. I actually noticed that too through the food here. If you come to Calgary, expect to have some good meals, because there are restaurants everywhere that are like authentic international cuisines. And it is so good. Except for Mexican.
Yeah, no, don't eat the empanadas in Canada.
No, do not. Don't trust the Mexi fries.
Can't
You know what? I have been here for 3.5 years. I finally found a good Mexican restaurant for the first time. 3.5 years in
Really?
a city of 1.5 million to find. Well,
Oh my
to be
gosh.
fair, I have found 3 Mexican restaurants in the whole city. 2 of them are not good. The third one technically isn't even in Calgary. It's in a small city, just technically outside the limits of Calgary. But no, that aside, it's just this big international mosaic. Young families, working class people who are kind of more affluent, typically have higher paying jobs, and the cost of living is through the roof. So think California cost of living.
So, kind of one last question before I hand it off to Sam, and I'm trying to look something else up as I'm talking. But basically, kind of explain the religious differences there in Calgary. So as I'm talking, I'm looking up the percentages in Ohio to compare, and I'm trying to kind of draw myself out to see what it is.
Mhm.
But it looks like, I mean, my assumption would be that at least half of the people here in Ohio would claim to be Christian, because that's just kind of how they were raised. Here we go. Ohio State University is saying that. Never mind, that's ethnicity. Go ahead and give me the averages for the Calgarians up there, and hopefully I'll get an answer by then.
Perfect. So I can give you something to start with, though. This is not official university research statistics. However, I grew up in Lancaster, Ohio. For those of you who don't know, it's a city just outside of Columbus. You're talking about 40,000 people. 40,000. Before I moved to Canada, I went online, I drove around, and I counted every church that I could see. Like Christian churches, I'm including Protestant and Roman Catholic in this. Anything that would fall under the Orthodox umbrella. And I found at least 75 churches. 75 churches for 40,000 people just within the city limits. And that translates pretty well across all of Ohio. A small town called Pleasantville, which has like 1,000 or so people, has like 8 churches. So even if people aren't really practicing Christians, they're at least culturally Christian for the time being. It's moving away from that, but for the time being. Calgary, the statistics from NAM from a couple years ago say that 5% of Calgary would say to be Christian of some sort. And that's being generous. We really estimate that it's more like 2 or 3% of the city. And there are 1.5 million people in Calgary. And there are 150 churches in the city. So whereas a city of 40,000 people had 75 churches, 1.5 million has just double that. And
Yep.
the thing is that there are not enough churches here to reach the population that is already here, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of people that are coming in every couple of years, expanding the city. So our church planting is barely, keeping up with the fringe of the city. We don't have enough church density to cover what's already here. But however, all of that is assuming that people are interested in going to church, which most of them are not, because Canada and Calgary specifically is very, very post-Christian. So if you were to go and ask people, did you go to church regularly, or even just, let's say, Christmas and Easter, like the two high holidays of the Christian calendar,
Sure.
you go to church on them? The grandparents would say, yep, Christmas and Easter we would go, or I was a regular church attender, go in, sit in the pew, be there. The parents and the kids, that's not a part of their life at all generally. It's like, why would I go?
Yeah.
And they say all that because it's a very pluralistic mindset. Like I said earlier, you do what's good for you. I'm going to do what's good for me. We'll talk about it. We'll shake hands and we'll walk away. But don't you dare try to tell me that your way is the only way, because that is not being considerate of others around you. Your way can be a way, but it's not the way. So that's kind of the culture, the mindset that we're working with here in Calgary. People who haven't grown up in church, whose parents did not grow up in church, and they're going, you believe in Jesus? That's great. You believe in the Hindu gods? That's awesome too. I believe in no God, and I think that's great. I have a good friend who has it's mixes of Christian and Wiccan and witch and Satanism, a bit of karma and Buddha, and it's the belief system that works for her.
Yeah. So for reference, you had said that 5% of the city claims to be Christian, maybe more like 2 to 3% in reality.
Yeah.
I did look up the U.S. percentages. I couldn't find Ohio specifically, but percentages in the United States as of 2017. 72% of our country claim to be some sort of Christian. That includes Catholics and Protestants, with
Yeah.
40-ish% of that being Protestants, and only 21% said no religion and 5% said other religions. So just kind of puts it in perspective, the differences. Even if like the people that are listening to this aren't believers, just like the cultural differences. Because like as an American, you think, okay, how do I get married? I have to have a pastor, an ordained pastor, to give me my certificate and to do the ceremony, and maybe I'll get married in a church. Or okay, it's Easter, when are we going to go celebrate? Or it's Christmas, what's the reason for the season? Like you just hear that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And obviously, as a Christian, it's a little bit different for us. But as a Canadian, it's probably really different, because you'll hear about Christmas, and it's probably not as much about the gospel story.
Nope, not at all.
Easter might not be as much about the resurrection. It might be more about the candy, or about the egg hunts, or
100%.
whatever. But yeah, it's probably just very different culturally speaking.
I think Sam, it's up for you now.
Yeah, before I get to my questions, I did a little quick maths here.
Ooh, the quick maths.
Jeremy was talking about 75 churches to 40,000 people. So to put a little retrospect, a little introspect on it, in Canada, that number comes out to one church for every 10,000 people. In Ohio, that comes to one church for every 530 people. And when we talk about the church in Canada, because this is an important distinction too between the U.S. and Canada, don't think a mega church with 20, 30 on staff pastors. What would you think? Like four staffed ministers per church in Canada, Jeremy?
If you're lucky or blessed, depending on how you'd like to look at it. In Calgary, I can tell you there are 3 mega churches that I'm aware of. The mega church not being, 20,000 people like you'd think of it, or even 5,000 people. We're talking mega church in Calgary is 1,000 plus. Most of your churches are 40 to 100 people here.
So
yeah, and I can name like 4 or 5 mega churches off the top of my head within 10 minutes of my house here in Columbus, and we're half that size.
Yes.
All right, so this is a good segue into your mission work. We'll talk a little bit about that. We kind of already talked about what motivates you, and I'm assuming this is probably going to be a very close answer to that. But what's the most rewarding thing for you in your mission work?
Yeah, like obviously, like I mentioned before, I'll spare the repeating answer, but it's seeing life coming. But if I had to say something else, it's the connections I get to make with people, which teenage Jeremy is very surprised to hear me say that, because I've always loved people, but connecting with people wouldn't exactly have been high on my priority list. But getting to know all the different people and being able to expand significantly beyond my cultural background. Because tell me if I'm wrong. Sam, I don't quite know what the situation is for you, but I'm guessing it's pretty similar. But Nate, in Ohio, pretty much everybody looks like us, talks like us, thinks like us, comes from a pretty similar background. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, I think Ohioans are all pretty similar.
Yep. I'm guessing that's somewhat along the same ballpark for you, Sam.
Yeah.
Here, that's not the case at all. You have so many different cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds. You have people who are like, yeah, I grew up in India. It was extremely oppressed. The government was corrupt. It was a blessing just to get out of there. And to sit down with these people and learn their stories, where they came from, see the way they view the world. And I'm not talking just Christians, I'm talking people from all over the place. To be able to expand my own worldview and get to know people and their stories in that way. When you take the reward of the gospel being spread and set that aside, which never set aside the gospel, but in this case, the connections with people have been by far the most rewarding part of it.
That's good. Good. So, that being said, would you suggest it to others? Is this something that you would?
Absolutely, with the caveat if God calls you to it. If
Okay.
God is not calling you to this, don't do it. You'll hate it, you'll burn out, it'll be miserable, and you probably won't last more than 2 years. I'm just being honest. If God is calling you to this, or at least if you sense that he might be drawing you that way, then absolutely do it. Don't go without God's confirmation. But if that's something he's drawing you towards, it's going to be hard. It's going to be brutal. It's going to stretch you in some ways you didn't know you could be stretched. But you're going to come out a stronger person for it on the other side. And you're going to see some incredible things that you couldn't have imagined without following down that path.
Yep. So, final question here. If any of our listeners, anybody listening, wants to support you financially, how can they go about doing that?
Absolutely. So I am a certified church planting team member through the North American Mission Board, so I am official. Since I recently switched churches, I don't have a system set up to donate through NAM specifically anymore. But if you do want to support me, you are welcome to mail something to me, or prayer support's always appreciated. My email is hallaroundtheworld. That's HALL around the world at yahoo.com. Feel free to shoot me an email, to reach out. Financial support is always appreciated. You can mail that if you'd like. My address is 85 28 Heritage Drive in Cochrane, Alberta. T2J 0K1. No, it's T4C 0K1. I just changed my address recently.
And
and
for Americans, I think that sounds like a cheat code to something. That's
Yes,
a zip
it
code,
is.
by
That's
the
like
way. They have letters in their zip codes in Canada.
that's like the Konami code, but no.
ABAP plus start.
Yes, 99 lives. No, but yeah, I'm guessing you probably didn't pick up on the address from that though. So shoot me an email or get in touch with Sam or Nate. They can direct you my way as well. I'd love to connect, talk more about it. And if God's leading you to support what we're doing here, it'd be greatly appreciated. But absolutely, if you could keep us and what we're doing in your prayers, that would be just as much appreciated as well.
Yeah, we'll be sure to put email, the address, and all of your social media links in the description of the podcast as well, so you can look down there if you want to reach out to Jeremy, send him a encouraging message.
Always appreciated.